In the quiet countryside of Trinidad, the mornings came alive with the crowing of roosters and the chatter of villagers gathering in the marketplace. Yet for Marva, the day always began with dread. Her heart sank at the thought of facing the townsfolk, who saw her not as a person, but as the subject of ridicule. To them, Marva was the ugly one. Her face, they said, was unfortunate, her features a curse. Though she had never wronged anyone, her appearance became a source of entertainment for the villagers, especially the men who gathered in the market to jeer at her as she walked by. "Cover your eyes, man! Marva coming!" one would yell, sending ripples of laughter through the group. Hey, Marva, why you just stay home and save we eyes some trouble?" another would add, the others hollering in agreement. Marva would quicken her pace, clutching her basket of fruits and vegetables tightly. She always wore a wide-brimmed straw hat, tilted low to shield her face from the mocking stares. Beneath it, her lips pressed into a thin line as she fought back tears. Her life was a lonely one. Her cottage, a small wooden structure surrounded by lush greenery, was her sanctuary. She grew her own vegetables, tended to her chickens, and spent long hours reading the tattered books left behind by her late parents. The only person who treated her with any kindness was her Aunt Thora, a spiritual healer who lived deeper in the forest. Thora would visit Marva occasionally, bringing herbal remedies and warm words of encouragement. "Marva, child," she would say, her voice gentle but firm. "You're too sweet to let them fools get to you. It's not what they see that matter, is what in here." She tapped her chest over her heart. But no matter how often Thora reassured her, the sting of the villagers' cruelty was hard to ignore. It wasn't just the men's taunts. The women whispered behind her back, and the children pointed and giggled. Even the elders, who should have known better, shook their heads pityingly as she passed. As a little girl, she had been the target of relentless teasing at school. The other children would pull her hair, call her names, and whisper about how ugly she was. Marva had endured relentless teasing from her classmates. The words had stung just as much then as they did now, lingering like a curse she could never escape. They had laughed at her, pointing and whispering behind her back. Some were crueler than others, their voices echoing in her mind long after the school bell had rung. Marva's face looked like she tumbled out her mother's hands and straight into a pot of dasheen. The classroom had erupted with laughter, the kind that dug deep, the kind that made her wish she could vanish. She had never fought back, never defended herself. Instead, she had lowered her head, let her hair fall over her face, and endured it in silence. The teachers ignored the cruelty, and the other girls never invited her to play. She would come home crying to her mother, who would wipe her tears and tell her, "One day, Marva, people will see you for more than just your face." But that day never came. Her mother died when she was 12, leaving her alone with a father who had no patience for softness. He had been a hard man, a fisherman who spent more time at sea than at home. He barely spoke to her unless it was to bark an order. By the time he too passed away, Marva had long accepted that she had no place in this world. As she grew older, the whispers never stopped. The village men took pleasure in humiliating her, using her as the subject of their jokes. "Hey, Marva, why you don't walk with a veil? Maybe then we wouldn't have to see your face." Jules, the village blacksmith, would call out, and the others would roar with laughter. "You should stay inside, girl. Spare the people them eyes," Bernard would add, slapping his knee. Marva learned to move quickly, her head bowed beneath the brim of her wide straw hat. It shielded her from their stares, but not from their words. Only her Aunt Thora, a spiritual healer who lived deeper in the forest, had ever shown her kindness. Though the villagers saw Thora for her wisdom, they also feared her. She was old and wise, a woman who knew the ways of spirits and curses. "Marva," Thora had once told her, "people love to laugh at what they do not understand. But mark my words, child, what's sweet in goat mouth does sour in a belly." Marva held on to those words, but even they could not ease the weight of her suffering. She longed for a different life. She longed for the villagers to see her, not as an object of ridicule, but as someone worthy of love. That longing led her into the forest one evening, her vision blurred with tears, her chest aching with humiliation. She had fled the marketplace after another round of taunts. Her straw hat had slipped off in her haste, and she had been too ashamed to retrieve it. The farther she ran, the quieter the world became. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the sound of rustling leaves. She sank to her knees beneath a massive tree, her sobs shaking her body. "Why me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why was I made this way?" A chill wind swept through the trees. The night deepened unnaturally fast, the sky shifting from dusk to inky black. Then, a voice. What if it didn't have to be this way? Marva's breath caught in her throat. She turned sharply, her pulse hammering. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall, cloaked in darkness, with eyes that burned like molten gold. His presence was suffocating, powerful. "I've been watching you, Marva," the figure said, his voice smooth as silk. "I've seen your pain, your suffering. I know what you desire." Marva swallowed hard. "Who are you?" A slow, knowing smile spread across his face. "Some call me Le Diable." Marva stiffened. Every child in Trinidad grew up fearing stories of Le Diable. "You want them to see you differently, don't you?" he continued, circling her slowly. "To worship what they now scorn. I can make that happen." Marva's heart pounded. "Oh, beauty, power, the ability to make them regret every cruel word they've ever spoken to you." He tilted his head. "All I ask in return is your soul." Marva hesitated. The offer was intoxicating, yet terrifying. "And if I refuse?" The devil's smile widened. "Then you remain as you are, forgotten, ridiculed." He leaned in closer, his voice lowering to a whisper. "But think carefully, Marva. How much longer can you endure their laughter?" She thought of the jeers, the whispers, the way they turned away from her as if she were a disease. Her hands clenched into fists. "I accept," she said, her voice trembling. The devil's laughter echoed through the forest as he reached out and placed a cold hand on her forehead. A searing pain shot through her body, and everything went black. When she awoke, she felt different, lighter, powerful. She walked to the river, gazing at her reflection. Gone was the face she had hated her entire life. Her skin was smooth, her eyes bright, her features breathtaking. She was beautiful. "You are now La Diablesse," the devil said, his voice a satisfied purr. "But remember, beauty always comes at a price." The transformation was immediate. When Marva returned to the village the next morning, the men who once mocked her now couldn't take their eyes off her. Their cruel words were replaced with stammering compliments and eager smiles. Jules was the first. That night, she led him into the forest, her laughter light and teasing, as he followed eagerly. "Marva," he murmured as they walked deeper. I never really looked at you before." She smiled sweetly. "Is that so?" When they reached a clearing, she turned to him, her eyes dark. "Do you know who I am, Jules?" Confusion flickered across his face. "What you mean?" She lifted her skirts, revealing the cloven hoof hidden beneath. Jules staggered back, his eyes wide with horror. "La Diablesse," she whispered. "And you are mine." Jules ran, but the forest twisted around him, leading him in endless circles. By morning, his body was found at the bottom of a ravine. Days later, another man, Derek, suffered the same fate. Then Bernard, then two more. One by one, the men vanished into the forest, never to return alive. At first, the village whispered, dismissing the situations as misfortune or drunken missteps. But as the pattern continued, fear took root. No one spoke Marva's name aloud, yet unease settled over the marketplace, in the doorways of homes, and around late-night fires, where old stories were told in hushed voices. Men who had once laughed so easily now glanced over their shoulders. Fewer dared to follow a beautiful stranger into the night. And then, just as quietly as it had begun, the disappearances stopped, life in the village resumed, cautious but unchanged. That was until the arrival of a stranger. Months had passed when Ethan returned, unfamiliar to those who lived there now, but not to the land itself. A journalist specializing in Caribbean folklore, he had spent years traveling, collecting stories from places where myths still breathed in the shadows of ancient trees. But this journey was different. It was a return to a place he had once called home. The villagers did not recognize him, and he did not tell them that he had once lived there as a child. They approached him with caution, curious about his presence, but unwilling to trust too quickly. The village was not the same as he remembered. Time had changed it, just as time had changed him. Yet, as he walked through the familiar dirt paths and listened to the hum of daily life, he felt the past stirring within him. He had heard the whispers of La Diablesse, the chilling tales of men who had disappeared without a trace. Some spoke of curses, others of punishment for sins unknown. It was the kind of story that intrigued him, but there was something about the way people spoke of it, the fear in their eyes, the way they refused to say too much, that made it feel more than just legend. One afternoon, as he wandered through the village, lost in thought, he found himself drawn to the riverbank, the soft rush of water, the towering trees swaying in the breeze. It was a place that called to something deep inside him. As he walked along the edge, his gaze settled on a woman sitting by the water. She sat perfectly still, her fingers skimming the surface, her eyes distant, lost in thoughts of her own. She was stunning, one of the most beautiful women he had ever seen. But as he watched her, he sensed something beyond her beauty, a sadness, a loneliness, as if she carried a weight only she could bear. He hesitated for a moment before stepping closer. "May I sit?" he asked, gesturing to the rock beside her. Marva glanced at him, wary, but after a brief pause, she nodded. From that moment, a quiet understanding began to grow between them. Their first conversations were brief, carefully measured. He would ask about the river, the land, the changing seasons. She would answer in as few words as necessary. Yet, each time he returned, she was still there. As days passed, their conversations deepened. Ethan shared stories of his travels, of cities that never slept, of mountains that kissed the sky, of places where myths were not just stories but living, breathing forces. Marva listened, sometimes responding, sometimes just letting his words fill the silence. She wasn't sure why she let him stay, why she didn't push him away as she had done with so many others. Perhaps it was because he did not look at her like the others did. He did not stare in lust or fear. He watched her with quiet curiosity, as if searching for something beyond what was visible. Though the villagers had not recognized him, there was something about Ethan that stirred a memory within Marva. She could not place it, yet his presence tugged at something deep inside her, like a whisper of a life she had once known but had long forgotten. One evening, as they sat by the river, their usual quiet companionship was broken by an unexpected question from Marva. "Do you remember a girl from school?" she asked, her voice hesitant. "Someone the others used to tease?" Ethan frowned slightly, thinking, "There were a few, I suppose." Marva's fingers traced absent patterns in the water. "This girl, she dropped her books one day, and no one helped her. They just laughed, except for one boy." Ethan's gaze sharpened, the memory surfacing from the depths of his past, distant but not forgotten. A little girl, small and withdrawn, standing frozen as the classroom erupted with cruel laughter. He had knelt beside her, picked up her books, and handed them back without a word. His breath caught in his throat as realization struck. "That was you," he murmured, his brow furrowed. "I didn't realize you knew I had lived in this village." Marva nodded, but kept her eyes on the water. "I never forgot that." Ethan felt something shift inside him, something deeper than memory. "Neither did I," he admitted. She turned to him then, her expression unreadable. "It was the first time someone was kind to me." For a moment, neither of them spoke, the river's gentle current filling the silence between them. But something had changed, something unspoken, something neither of them was quite ready to name. A beat of silence passed between them, heavy with unspoken things. For the first time in years, Marva felt something unexpected, ease, and perhaps, just perhaps, the beginnings of trust. And without realizing it, between the soft murmur of the river and the warmth of the setting sun, a friendship began to blossom. One evening, about a week later, as the golden light stretched across the river, the silence between them shifted. The words that had lingered, unspoken, finally found their way to the surface. "I've heard about you," Ethan said gently, watching her carefully. "But I don't believe everything they say." Marva's expression hardened instantly, the softness of the moment vanishing. "Then you're a fool." Her voice carried an edge, not out of anger, but out of self-preservation. Ethan didn't flinch. Instead, he gave a small, knowing smile. "Maybe, but I think there's more to you than what they see." Marva turned away, her heart tightening. No one had ever looked at her like that before. Not since she had changed, not since she had become La Diablesse. She wanted to believe him, but she knew better. Ethan had begun to feel something he hadn't expected, a pull toward Marva, something deeper than curiosity. He admired her sharp mind, the way she saw the world in quiet, thoughtful ways. He wanted more than just conversation, more than just friendship. But one afternoon, as Ethan made his way through the village, a voice called out to him, firm and deliberate. He turned to see an older man watching him closely, his expression unreadable, as if weighing his next words carefully. The man was weathered, his face lined with age, his eyes heavy with something Ethan couldn't quite place. He had the look of someone who had seen much, someone who carried the weight of knowledge that others refused to acknowledge. "You're Ethan, yes?" the man asked, studying him. Ethan nodded. "That's right. I knew your father," the man said, crossing his arms. "Good man. You look like him. We worked together, and he used to talk about you before he left." Ethan smiled slightly. "You knew my father?" The man didn't return the smile. Instead, he leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "You've been spending time with Marva." Ethan's stomach tightened. "So what if I have?" The man exhaled, shaking his head. "Listen, boy, I don't know what she told you, but she's not what she seems." Ethan frowned. "You sound like the others." "This ain't foolish talk," the man said firmly. "You think it's a coincidence the men who chased after her all left this world? First Jules, then Derek, then Bernard, and a few others, all gone, just like that." Ethan hesitated, but he shook his head. "That doesn't mean she had anything to do with it." The old man exhaled slowly, as if he had seen this before, as if he had tried to warn others and failed. "You remind me of your father," he muttered, too stubborn to listen. Ethan felt his jaw clench. "I don't believe in fairy tales." The man studied him for a long moment. Then he stepped back. "You should," he said simply, "before it's too late." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving Ethan standing in the fading light, doubt creeping into the edges of his mind. Weeks passed, and Ethan refused to let distance grow between them. He sought out Marva, not because of her beauty. There was something else, something unspoken that drew him in. He couldn't name it, couldn't explain why he felt so compelled to be near her, but it was there, lingering between them, like an invisible thread. At first, he told himself it was curiosity, but as time went on, he knew it was more than that. He wanted to understand her, to break through the barriers she had built around herself. She fascinated him, the way she would sometimes stare into the distance, lost in Tayat, as if she existed in two worlds at once. The way her voice carried a quiet sorrow, even when she spoke of simple things. She was unlike anyone he had ever met. Maybe, just maybe, he was falling in love with her. Marva, despite herself, found comfort in Ethan's presence. She had spent so many years in solitude, convinced that no one would ever look at her with anything but fear or desire. Yet, here was someone who saw her, not just the beauty she had gained, nor the curse she carried, but something deeper. But as Ethan grew closer to Marva, something else stirred in the shadows. The whispers began again, curling through the night like smoke. Cold wind slithered through the trees even when the air should have been still. And then the voice came. "You're getting soft, Marva." It hissed in the wind, sharp as broken glass. Marva's breath hitched, her pulse quickening. She had been expecting him, dreading him. Slowly she turned. The devil stood before her, his form shifting between shadow and substance, his golden eyes burning with amusement and fury. "You disappoint me," he murmured. "I gave you power, beauty, and yet you hesitate." Marva clenched her fists. "He has done nothing to deserve this." The devil chuckled, the sound slithering around her like a serpent. "Neither did the others, but you didn't seem to mind then." She flinched. She did mind. Now, the men she had led into the forest had deserved punishment, hadn't they? Hadn't they been cruel to her? But Ethan was different. The devil stepped closer, his presence pressing down on her like a weight she couldn't escape. His voice was smooth, laced with quiet menace. "You made a pact, Marva," he murmured, "or have you forgotten what you owe me?" He paused, letting the silence stretch before delivering his final command. "You have 7 days." Marva's heart clenched. She hadn't forgotten. She could never forget. Ethan was different. He was kind, but the devil's hold on her was absolute. As time passed, Ethan's presence in the village became a source of curiosity, and for Marva, an unexpected solace. Unlike the others, he did not seek her out for her beauty. He was drawn to something deeper. Slowly, whispers spread among the villagers. At first, he had been just another outsider, but now, some began to look at him more closely, studying his face, his mannerisms. Recognition flickered in the eyes of the older ones, the ones who had been there long enough to remember. "That's the boy who used to live here," someone murmured one afternoon in the marketplace. "Ethan, yes, I remember now. His father was a good man." With the realization came cautious acceptance from some, while others remained wary, their suspicions unshaken. But Ethan paid little attention to the shifting glances. He was more interested in Marva. He would join her at the edge of the market, away from the judgmental stares, to share stories about his travels. "You have a way of seeing the world," he said one afternoon, his voice warm, "like you're carrying secrets even the wind can't touch." Marva chuckled softly, her guard slipping for just a moment. "Maybe I am." Ethan leaned in slightly, his expression thoughtful. "Secrets aren't always meant to be carried alone." Marva looked away, her smile fading. If only he knew. One day, Ethan found her by the river, sketching in a small notebook. He sat beside her, offering her a mango he'd picked from the market. "For you," he said simply. She hesitated, surprised by the gesture. "Why?" "Because everyone deserves kindness," he replied, his gaze steady. "And because I think you need someone to remind you of that." Marva accepted the mango, her chest tightening. She had spent so long believing she was unworthy of kindness that Ethan's attention felt foreign, almost painful. But she could not deny the warmth his presence brought. For the first time, she wished she could exist outside of the pact she made with the devil. Later that night, as Marva wandered the forest to clear her mind, the air grew thick and cold. Shadows twisted around her, and a familiar chilling voice echoed through the trees. "You're holding back, Marva." She froze. The devil stepped out from the darkness, his form more shadow than substance, but his presence was suffocating. "Why haven't you lured the stranger into the forest?" he demanded. Marva's heart raced. "He's different," she said, her voice trembling. "He hasn't hurt me like the others." The devil's laugh was low and menacing. "And yet, you made a pact, beauty and power in exchange for your soul. Do not forget what you owe me." "I won't bring him here," Marva said firmly. though fear gripped her. "I won't do it." The devil's form loomed closer, his voice now a growl. "You think you have a choice? You are mine, Marva, and so is he, if I demand it." Marva clenched her fists, her mind racing. Ethan's kindness had begun to crack the walls she had built around her heart, but the devil's hold on her was absolute. She returned to her cottage that night, pacing in frustration and dread. The next morning, Marva sought solace in Aunt Thora's hut. The older woman was weaving a basket when Marva burst in, her face pale. "Thora," she began, her voice shaking. I don't know what to do." The elder woman looked up, her sharp eyes narrowing. "You finally come. I see it in your face. Trouble brewing, eh?" Marva hesitated before nodding. "It's him, the devil. He wants Ethan." Thora's lips pursed tightly. "I warned you, child. You can't dance with the devil and not get burned." She set the basket aside, rising to place a steadying hand on Marva's shoulder. "But you still have a choice." "I didn't think it would come to this," Marva admitted, tears in her eyes. "He was kind to me, Thora. No one's ever been kind." Thora's gaze softened. "Kindness is a gift, but it's not enough to save your soul. You have to decide what kind of woman you want to be. The devil might hold your pact, but your spirit, that still belongs to you." Marva looked down, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm scared." Thora pulled her into a gentle embrace. "Fear is natural, but remember, monkey know which tree to climb. Choose the tree that leads you back to yourself, not the one that leads you further into darkness." Marva pulled back, her brows knitted in worry. "But how? He owns me." Thora's eyes softened with understanding, but her voice remained firm. She placed a small, carved wooden charm into Marva's hands. "This will protect you," she said. "But if you want to break free, you must face him, stand strong, and choose what's right, even if it costs you everything, even your life." Marva's fingers curled around the charm as a chill ran through her. The devil's grip on her had been absolute for so long. Was there truly a way out? Not after what had happened to those men. The days ahead would decide everything. Would she betray Ethan, the only person who had ever truly seen her? Or would she defy the devil, knowing the price of disobedience could be more than she was prepared to pay? Either way, there would be no turning back. Her decision would change everything. If you love part 1 of this dramatic retelling of La Diablesse, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Part 2 will reveal Marva's ultimate choice. Will she escape the devil's hold, or will she be lost to the darkness forever? Stay tuned.